Hello, and welcome to Securing Justice, a housing insecurity podcast series brought to you by the California Center for Ethics and Policy in the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences at Cal Poly Pomona. This project was made possible with support from California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. You can learn more about Cal Humanities at calhum.org. My name is Alex Madva, and as director of the California Center for Ethics and Policy, or CCEP, and on behalf of the CCEP faculty fellows co-organizing Securing Justice, namely Brady Collins, Corey Aragon, and Michael Wu, we are pleased to bring you our final event on housing. First, I'd like to encourage you to visit our website, and I'm putting the link in the chat now, where you can sign up for our mailing list and then stay in the know about all our upcoming events. Speaking of which, before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to let you know that we are planning a full lineup of events for the spring 2022 semester, when we will transition from focusing on California housing insecurity to focusing on California's climate crisis. Please save the dates for 4 panels we are going to host, roughly on the topics of fire, water, air, and land. So these will take place on Friday, January 28th at 12 p.m., where we're going to talk about California's endless wildfire season. Then on February 25th, we'll talk about power, water, and the Golden State. On Friday, March 18th, we'll talk about seeking justice or mitigating harm, the effects of environmental disaster recovery and air pollution. And on Friday, April 15th, we'll talk about soil, food, and the ecosystems of California. Also, if you haven't had a chance to check them out yet, the first 5 episodes of our podcast are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And so I've just dropped into the chat a couple different podcatchers where you can find our podcast. So without further ado, today's presenter is Betto Arcos, a native of Jalapa, Veracruz, Mexico, and now living in LA. He is an independent journalist and storyteller, a frequent contributor to NPR and the BBC, and author of Music Stories from the Cosmic Barrio. So let me put a little more information about him in the website where you can find, in the chat where you can find his website and a link to his book. Today, he'll be sharing stories about the intersection of housing and music, covering themes including identity, education, adversity, immigration, women's empowerment, and community building. So on that note, please bring your virtual hands together as I hand the digital mic over to Betto Arcos.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Alex, and also, of course, to Mike Wu, who initially, put us in contact and actually the reason why I'm here. I've been writing about music and culture for a better part of my life, some 20 plus years. And just in the past year, I published my book called, as Alex just said, Music Stories from the Cosmic Barrio. It's a compilation of 150 stories about music, culture, politics, identity, empowerment of women, immigration, and much more. The storytelling aspect of my work has to do with how, first of all, how to tell a story. How to tell a story about a musician, because after all, I work for news organizations, namely National Public Radio and the BBC, and they are always interested in the story behind the art making, the music making. And so every time I pitch a story, I have to come up with ideas as to how to write a story. And every now and then I come across stories that are more than just about music. They are, in a sense, about the human aspect, the story of survival, the story of difficulty, a story of adversity, the story of conflict. Sometimes I even came across a story about violence, and I, of course, figure out how to connect the two, music and the story, music and this other aspect that sometimes it passes by and people are not familiar with. This is how I came across 3 stories that I'm going to talk about today. And if I can, I will talk about maybe one or two more. The first one I want to talk about is about a location, a place, a community center, if you will, and that is essential for the fabric of a community in Los Angeles that has suffered a lot historically, culturally, and so on. The African American community, not far from where I live. Actually, I live in LA in a sense in a historic place called the Village Green. Roughly speaking, about maybe some of you know who I'm talking about, because I know there's been groups of students that have come out to visit this place because it's of its unique historic value. The Village Green is not far from a place called Leimert Park, which is as I said, a kind of a cultural center, a hub for the African American community, and has been for decades. Some 30 years ago, a drummer of renown that played with some of the big names in jazz, Billy Higgins, and a poet, Kamau Daoud, who's still around. Billy Higgins passed away a few years ago. Kamau Daoud decided to create a center for people to come and play and learn how to play music, specifically jazz, but not just that, also poetry and visual arts and other things. And this place is called the World Stage. The World Stage in Leimert Park has been this hub for a few decades, and I just want to briefly read you a little bit of what I wrote to give you a sense of its place in the African American community. For decades, Leimert Park has been a cultural hub for LA's African American arts community, and the World Stage is one of its centers. Founded by the late jazz drummer Billy Higgins and poet Kamau Daoud, the performance space continues to nurture local artists with weekly educational workshops. And on a Saturday afternoon at the World Stage, a group of 20 musicians are playing in a big band jazz workshop led by pianist Billy McCoy, who says, one of the things we have in this workshop, people who are retired, younger musicians who are in college, who come here to learn because it's something they can't find anywhere else. And for the little money that we hardly charge anything. They feel that it's the only place where they can learn how to play the blues and how to play jazz. And one of those musicians is Rich Walker, who lives in Duarte. I don't know if you know where Duarte is, but it's far from here. And he plays baritone saxophone. He's been attending jazz workshop at the World Stage for the past 2 years. And this is what he said that really touched me. This is probably the only place in Southern California where you can come and hang out with people that are striving to understand the language of bebop. They want to get together and play and study. It's in the African American community, and it's like the focus of art and jazz. And it's just like the real thing. It's the heavy duty learning that you need. And this place, sadly, has been moving around the Leimert Park area because they have been struggling with funding to pay the rent. The last place where I interviewed the folks at the Leimert Park at the World Stage, which was in July of 2019, was the smallest that I've seen before, that I've ever seen. I've been to the World Stage a couple of times before, and it was in a different location. It seems as though their locations just got smaller because of the situation with the rent that keeps going higher and higher. And I don't know if you know, but that part of the African American community has also been going up in terms of people moving in from other places and people selling their units, their housing, their houses. And so the cost of rent, the cost of living, the cost of real estate has been going up, and so the Leimert Park area has been going up in rent as well. I was very touched also to find that there's a group of women that gets together as well. A group of mostly 20 or so African-American community women of all ages. They gather in a circle, singing and playing African songs. And when I visited them, they were singing an South African Zulu song inspired by a spiritual leader called Sangoma. The group is called SHINE, which stands for Sisters Healing, Inspiring, Nurturing, and Empowering. And they're led by instructor Renee Fisher Mims, who started the workshops more than 15 years ago. And she says, we go over the diaspora, we talk about African rhythms, songs, and movement. It's a healing tool, she says. It's a good way of expressing communication. And we get a chance to explore the culture, because a lot of the folklore and the medicinal aspect of drumming, not so much as a group, but it works as a therapeutic. And so we get together as a group and heal together. And imagine a 77-year-old woman. Her name is Flores Penson. She's the oldest member of this group. And she's been going to the world stage for 15 years. This is what she told me. I call it my stress buster. It's like the feeling and the drumming, it gets to your soul. It's very spiritual, and you could actually just get lost with the drumming. It's like a magnet, if you will. It draws people because of the energy that exudes when a person comes here. It's just the greatest, she says. The world stage recently celebrated its 30th anniversary, and executive director Dwight Tribble hopes that the next generation that takes over the space will build on the solid foundation that's been established over the last 30 years. That's the story of the world stage in Leimert Park, a place that I thought needed some attention, because they've been struggling to find a place that they could call home. They're still renting, but I firmly believe this is the kind of community cultural center that should have its own home. That they shouldn't have to worry about paying the rent. They should have a home, and I felt compelled, in a sense. I felt like I had the responsibility to tell the story of this group, of this cultural center, because of the dire situation. I'm always, in touch with the folks who run it, and it just so happens that it was the 30th anniversary, and I thought it was a perfect time to tell their story. Are there any questions about this first story as we move along? Because we have just an hour, so I need to move kind of swiftly here.
So we actually have an hour and a half. So
okay,
we do have plenty of time. So certainly don't feel rushed. But I think I like the idea of pausing now for the first round of questions. I think that makes sense.
Yes, that would be great. I see some. Great. Okay. All right, Daniel, you have a question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask real quick, like, how did you discover this place? Like, how did you come upon it and find out about this organization?
Like many of the stories that I do, and like I said before, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. It's always about relationships. It's always about who you know and how you you are depending on your interests. Like I'm going to give you a sort of an example of, there are music journalists who write about music for major mainstream organizations, but very few are interested in the human side of the story. Many of them are interested in sort of the big names and sort of that kind of story. I'm interested in the little person. I'm interested in stories that hopefully somebody that has money, when they listen to the story, will say, oh, I want to help this organization, I want to donate, without me having to say to them, hey, you have money, you should help them. I think this is what I think is the power of radio. There's been many stories that I've done over the years, especially on NPR, where the musician or the producer or the record label said to me, man, thanks to your story, our record is doing better. And I love those stories too, but when I find a story like this, I feel like, no, I have to tell that story too. So I've known about this organization for a number of years, and I've been wanting to tell their story. And I felt like, it's their 30th anniversary. This is a good excuse to pitch it to my editor.
That's super cool. Yeah, thank you for answering.
Yeah. And anything else? Anybody else who wants to comment or say something? I mean, you don't have to ask a question, but it'd be great to sort of address this particular story, and then we'll move to the next one. If there's no more, I will then continue.
Thank you for highlighting the world stage. I was a jazz musician for a while. My husband is a jazz musician, and I think it's so important that, especially for music like jazz, like the blues, which gets, for lack of a better word, gentrified in higher ed. If you look at a lot of music majors, jazz majors who are going to college and learning how to play, that's a lot of privilege, a lot of money. So places like the world stage, where you can go without paying a lot of money and being close to where the young people are, is so important, especially for the people of color. That's where that music came from, and it's getting so, commercialized, and higher education is so expensive. So it's so important, places like that, jam sessions where people can go and actually walk the walk and not just take a lesson at home, so no, thank you so much. It's so important.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you're making, because so many musicians, young or older, are interested in learning, but they don't have the means to go to Berklee School of Music. They don't have the means to go to the Manhattan School of Music. So this is very important in the community, and that's why I feel like, this is the kind of organization that deserves support of some sort from either a big foundation or I don't know, someone that could really help this organization have a home, a permanent home, so they don't have to worry about fundraising every year like like many organizations like them. I certainly hope that Melinda Gates took notice of them. I would think, and I would hope that they, because she went around the country with her foundation giving money to arts organizations. I hope that the world stage got some money. I'm not aware that they did. So, but yeah, their story is really important. So if nobody else wants to comment or has a question, I would like to then move to the next story. And this is a story that is, how can I put it? It's a story of Los Angeles. It's the story of this country. It's the story of immigrants who make something out of nothing. It's the story of two band leaders who, let me show you. You have to see the photos here. Let's see if I can hone in on this. See, this is the photo above is a small, I would like to call it an informal yet serious music school in somebody's garage. I know it's hard to believe because you guys are going to this high-end, super expensive college, right? But this is a school to me as well. It's a school for a brass band. I don't know if you know, but there's a great musical tradition of brass bands in, well, all over the world, but we're going to focus in right now in Oaxaca, Mexico. Oaxaca, in southern part of the country of Mexico, has hundreds of brass bands spread out throughout the state, and every year they get together in a kind of a stadium, venue, and they duke it out, so to speak. They play their hearts out for hours on end, and this tradition goes back, more than 100 years, when these instruments became available in different communities across the country. In Los Angeles, believe it or not, there are some dozen brass bands that if you go to their venues to listen, you might think, where am I? You might think you're in a different country. In a sense, you are, because this is almost like a reimagining or a reappropriation of the space, with their own traditions, with their own music. I came upon a couple of really touching stories, and I wanted to bring them together. And the story was basically called Oaxaca Brass Bands in Los Angeles. The first one is rather exciting, and at the same time, you think, well, how did that happen? This musician that I've known for a number of years, his name is Esteban Zúñiga, is a landscaping gardener, for a living. He has his truck and he's got his equipment. I'm sure you've seen many of these folks in your neighborhood, wherever you live. They go around taking care of people's yards, patios, etc. He does that for a living, but he is also a musician. He's a passionate musician. He plays clarinet, he plays guitar, and occasionally he also directs brass bands. I've known about him for a number of years because a mutual friend of ours leads a band, and he was a part of this band back in Mexico, in Oaxaca. By the way, he's also a completely bilingual, bicultural person. He speaks fluent English and he speaks fluent Spanish. And occasionally he also speaks the language of his mother and grandmother, which is Zapotec. And so I said to him, hey, Esteban, so I know you have a band now. Don't you have a band? You've been posting pictures on social media. What's up with that? When do you rehearse? I said, I'm doing a story about brass bands, and I want to see if maybe I can do a story about your band. And he goes, well, I know that I'm bragging too much about it right now, but I'm not really ready because we're still rehearsing. We're not ready to play publicly. I've been working with these kids for about 3 months, and we need at least another 3 or 4 months before we can play in public. Because this is the real stuff. How many brass bands there are in LA, and I don't want to make a fool of myself, with kids playing out of tune and all that stuff. I said, okay, well then, when do you think I can go in and check out your rehearsal? And he goes, how about next month? We'll make a date and you can come over. I said, perfect. I said, I'll pitch the story to my editor. In the meantime, I'll do another story. So I went over to his house, not far from here. You probably know where this is, Pico Boulevard, right between La Brea and Arlington, maybe a little more than that. There's a lot of Oaxacan businesses and restaurants, and he lives not far from there, actually. I showed up one evening around 7 p.m. because he told me he rehearses at night because, all these kids go to school during the day, right? They have to get home, do their homework, and then go to rehearse in his house. So when I went in there in the house, he says, actually, we're playing in the back, so come in the back. It turns out it was his garage. He had fixed it up like a studio, complete with these soundproof walls. He set up, he had to have a bathroom in there so the kids could use the bathroom and not have to go into his house and that kind of thing. And when I sat down with him to interview him, I said, Esteban, so how did you do this? He goes, well, that's a long story. I don't know if you want to hear it. I said, I do want to hear it. He says, I was playing in the garage, but it wasn't soundproof. And the neighbors were complaining and they were calling the police on me. I said, what? Yeah. They called the police 2 times, and the police came and they shut me down. And they told me, look, you have to either stop doing this or do something to your garage so your neighbors don't complain, because this thing is too loud. Can you imagine this picture that I showed you? There are roughly about 12 kids in there, but sometimes on a regular, rehearsal, he could have up to 20 kids in there playing brass instruments. Now, let me tell you what kind of brass instruments they play. They play sousaphone, they play saxophone, tenor and alto saxophones, clarinets. They also have a couple of drummers, trombone. So imagine a group of 15 or 20 kids playing brass band music from Oaxaca at about 8 p.m. when you're trying to watch your favorite television show. Probably not too fun, right? So of course, after you got tired of telling your neighbor to shut, the heck out, then you call the police, and they did. The third time, guess what happened? Everybody's guessing? Okay. He was summoned downtown. He had to go to a hearing before a judge. And guess what the judge told him? Anybody want to take a guess? Yeah. The judge was nice. The judge said to him, look, either you fix up your garage with something or you stop playing, because otherwise I'm going to fine you big time. And I don't think you have the money to pay what I'm going to fine you. And, plus you don't want to keep coming back here, do you? So he went back, and out of his own pocket, he fixed up the garage and made it soundproof. So when I showed up, that evening that I showed up, I couldn't hear anything outside until I walked into the garage and I realized he had soundproofed the room. Now, why is this happening in Los Angeles? Why is it that this place, which you could almost call a community center, a school for kids, because the story about these kids is I have to read you something that I wrote, and in my interviews that I did I interviewed about 3 or 4 of the kids. I interviewed a couple of the parents. Of course, I just interviewed Esteban, the band leader, and I want to read you a little passage what I wrote about this. Tonight, in that soundproof garage, complete with air conditioning and a bathroom, Esteban Zúñiga teaches a group of 15 students ranging in ages 8 to 16. Saúl Martínez is one of Zúñiga's students. He's 8 years old and he plays soprano saxophone. Norma is Saúl's mother. She's been bringing her son to Zúñiga's music school for the past 10 months. She says Saúl puts a lot of effort into it, learns more every day, and is persistent. She's seen his progress. That's why she keeps bringing him. That and the fact that her son is learning Oaxacan customs and keeping its traditions alive. Esteban Zúñiga and other teachers like him are replicating a tradition from Oaxaca called Escoleta, a music school based in a village. Each village has one. The most important thing is that once they have an Escoleta, it's music for everybody in their hometown, basically free. So they can keep passing the musical tradition. That's what Esteban Zúñiga told me. That's the story that touches me. That's the story that moves me. That a gardener, that a landscape artist who works day in and day out, taking care of people's rich homes in Beverly Hills in the west side of Los Angeles, out of his own pocket, decided to fix his garage to turn it into a music school so that these kids that are supported by 15 to 20 different families can have a place to go and learn an instrument. So questions or comments on this one?
So has he never had any more complaints? Did he?
No more.
Wow, that's really cool.
Okay, there's silence. I need some comments or questions.
Are there like recordings of the performances of the kids or anything like that?
There's not a formal recording per se that they certainly perform in various events, and in fact, trying to remember that I myself recommended, like the following year, when the band was ready to perform, I recommended them to perform at the music center. So they perform at events around town, but they haven't really recorded. There's probably stuff on YouTube, that the families probably, they always want to share it with everyone. There's some comments. Very lame neighbors. Well, yeah, someone else said it's a beautiful story. Wish it wasn't necessary, but it's beautiful. And yeah, that's one dedicated teacher. There is a second story that is part of this story that I did, and that's kind of a bigger, if you will, but a bigger story only because the teacher actually has taught in the last maybe 15 years something like 500 kids in the Oaxacan community. Now, keep in mind, when I talk about the Oaxacan community, I talk about the children and the families. Most of the children were either born here, or some of them were brought, early on as kids, and some of them probably, I'm sure, are sort of the dreamers, if you know what I'm talking about, the dreamer types. So that were brought here, 15 or 20 years ago. But this particular teacher, his name is Estanislao Maqueos, has been teaching for about roughly 15 years now. I met him roughly about a couple of years after he arrived here. I met him through a friend, because at the time I was working with a singer that some of you might know. Her name is Lila Downs. She's sort of a well-known singer from Mexico, and she's from Oaxaca. So I used to be her co-manager. So one day she asked me if I knew of a brass band that could play with her at her concert in Los Angeles. And so I found this brass band and through a friend, and that's how I learned about how widespread the brass band culture was in Oaxaca. And as I said before, now there's something like 12 to 15 brass bands all over, combined LA and Orange County. So this teacher has a location, actually. He has a place where he teaches students almost every day. And he has his own sort of, out of the teaching that he does with all the students, he formed his own band, and he calls it Maqueos Music Academy, just like that in English, Music Academy Band. His daughter actually is now also a director. She directs the brass band when he's busy doing stuff. So here's the story. He came to LA undocumented. He worked in odd jobs for a while until he figured out how he could teach, because he was the music director of a band in his hometown. And when things got difficult, that he couldn't support his family, he decided to move to LA, and he thought he could probably do the same as he did back home, but it took him a couple of years to establish himself. So he's been also moving around that area of Pico Boulevard in different locations. He was at one point, he was on Washington Boulevard, and now he's at this location. It's sort of a storefront place. It's at the corner of Normandy and Pico Boulevard, about a block from that from Normandy, west of Normandy on Pico Boulevard. It's called Maceo's Music Academy. It's a big place. It's owned by some, I think he told me the owner is Armenian American. And I had to ask him, I said, how much do you pay a month for this massive location? Because this is not a garage, just like the story before. This is like a big warehouse. I mean, when you walk in, it's a big space. And he says, I pay $5,000 a month. I said to him, really? I said, how do you do this? And he goes, well, you know, the families are paying me, you know, they pay for the education of their kids. And so they're the ones that are helping me pay the rent. He says, without them, it's impossible to do it. So he has probably up to 50 to 100 students on and off that pay, you know, every month for their kids' education. And that's the money that helps pay for the rent, the supplies, and of course, the salary of this teacher. And I don't know to this day if he actually has papers yet, okay? Because he was here, like I said, 15 years ago, and I don't know if he managed to get legal or not. So it's a story that that's yet to be told. But on a given night, like I showed up, they were rehearsing, you know, let me just show you a picture and see if you can see it. There's the room, there's one side of the room, it's, as you can tell, there's a lot of depth in there, so it's a big place. And I think that's his daughter directing the band. But you know, this is a band that has, you know, 8 clarinets, you know, 7 alto saxophones, you know, 2 sousaphones, you know, 2 drummers. It's a big brass band, and they're very, very popular around town because they participate in all the festivities, you know, Oaxaca related festivities, you know, patron saints and so on. So I showed up one night when they were rehearsing, and it is loud in there because you know, there's some soundproofing in there, but they don't have to worry about the neighbors because it's a business area. So but there was also a ballet folklorico dancing as they were playing, because this is music that's dance to. It's not music to listen to. I mean, you can listen to it too as well, but there's a folk dance group dancing to the music, because they play music from all over the state of Oaxaca, and each region of Oaxaca, if you're not familiar with that, they have their own dance, their own traditional dances. So they were dancing in different, you know, costumes and so on. So let me tell you a bit of the story of what I wrote about Maestro Maceos. I call him Maestro. 2 miles from Zúñiga's garage, a storefront on Pico Boulevard, is Maceo's Music Academy, home to a 30-piece brass band and a large dance troupe. They're rehearsing for a traditional music and dance festival called Guelaguetza. Estanislao Maceos was director of his hometown's municipal brass band. He moved to LA in 2000. After a few years working odd jobs and gaining the respect of the local Oaxacan community, he established his music school. Since then, he's helped form several brass bands. He says, it's difficult for the children because they were born here, and it's another culture that we're imposing on them. Maceo says, we're imposing our children to play our music, and it's hard, but after so much persistence, they do learn to love our Oaxacan music. They dance to it and they make it their own. Maceo says, the goal is to keep their children, the goal is to help their children find their identity. Even though they were born in this country, their roots are in Oaxaca. The roots of their parents are there. And part of their identity is this music. Oaxacan brass bands play all kinds of private and public events, from religious processions to dance festivals. There are people who call Maceo's Music Academy the hotbed of brass bands in Los Angeles. In 17 years, Maceo's Maestro Maceos has taught more than 500 students. Still, he says, he has bigger dreams. I want to have a big band with strings, a complete symphonic orchestra. There you have it. Another story about housing in LA and how, I mean, who's going to help support this brass band? It's a community center. It's funded by the parents, and that's how these traditions survive in Los Angeles. Any comments or questions?
So when was the last time you were in touch with him?
I've been in touch occasionally. In fact, every few months, I've driven past it. The school is still there. In fact, I don't know the date, but they're supposed to be in, like, I think it might be this weekend or next weekend. There is a big festival of brass bands in LA at some location in South LA. It's sort of a battle of the bands. I think something like 6 to 8 brass bands get together and they play, separately, and then at the end they all play together. You can imagine 6 or 8 brass bands playing all together, more than 100 musicians.
And how old will the kids be in that, like,
all
those
ages.
100 musicians? All
Yeah,
ages?
all ages. Yeah, I've seen there are brass bands that are sort of grown-ups, older adults. There are bands that they look more like late teens, pre-college type ages, and I've seen bands with kids that are like Esteban's band, 8 years, 10 years old. So yeah, all kinds. And by the way, a lot of women too. There are a lot of girls in these bands. They're not just men's bands. There's a lot of women. I don't know if you noticed in the picture, but there are several young women in both bands, in Esteban's and in Maceos's band. So yeah.
I'm just trying to imagine 100 like 10-year-olds all playing brass band at the same time.
Yeah.
And that would be an interesting sound.
That would be awesome. I've been to one of these gatherings some 5 years ago. It was unbelievable. Let me just say that, unbelievable that this sort of thing is happening in Los Angeles, but it's in this community. Nobody knows about them, other than their own community. It's parents and relatives, and everyone there obviously speaks Spanish only. I mean, you can go in there, and if you're not from that community, you're going to be noticed. Oh, what's that guy doing there? I'm even noticed, even though I'm Mexican. I showed up, with my microphone or whatever. Immediately, people realize that I'm not one of them, so to speak. Are the musical students directly taught about their Oaxacan roots, or is it mainly through the study of music? It's mostly through the study of music, because they're taught, this particular piece of music is played in this region, and this is the type of dance that that it applies to. And of course, now you have to understand, as I mentioned, Oaxaca has about 16 different regions, cultural regions. And what I mean by that is every region is different from another. They don't have the same dances, and they don't have the same gastronomy. They don't have the same traditions. They have different traditions, different saints, different festivities. Now, all of them have something in common. They celebrate the Day of the Dead at the same time of the year. That's in common. They all celebrate the Virgin of Guadalupe. They all have something in common, but they all have their separate saints and festivities that they organize and play, where these bands play. So, and here's a comment from Allison, who says, and they're filling gaps in the regular curriculum. There's not enough music arts taught in American schools at all, let alone culturally specific community building. This is so heartening. I couldn't add more to that comment. That's what I'm talking about. You probably know about Yola, the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles because it's supported and funded by the LA Phil, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. That's another great, way in which kids with, little access to, with or no access to big schools, they learn about classical music in different, places where they. I did a story about them, and it's actually in the book. I did a story about Yola. I even interviewed the rock star of the LA Phil, Gustavo Dudamel, and he couldn't be more proud. Let me tell you that couldn't be more proud of the fact that there are, such important programs in Los Angeles, and that Yola is part of, the LA fabric now. You can't think of the LA Phil now without this youth orchestra. I don't know if anybody has seen them, but they are absolutely amazing musicians, all of them. I mean, when I heard them play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or even compositions by Latin American composers, I said, geez, who needs the LA Phil? They were amazing. When I went to interview the musicians in Yola for my story, I listened to the rehearsal. I was astounded. It was just fantastic to see all of these, teenagers playing Saint-Saëns or Beethoven or Strauss. I mean, it's incredible. But it's also incredible to see, the mom and pop, if you will, music schools. And by the way, this is just one music school in LA that I've been in touch with. I also attended another type of music school, which is not quite a music school, but it's a cultural organization, which is the Los Angeles Balalaika Orchestra. Remember the instrument here? Actually, this is a gift from one of the musicians of the Balalaika Orchestra, because I did a story about them for a program called The World out of Boston. It's a new news program, international. And that's also a community effort. They rehearse, of all places, at the Russian Orthodox Church on Melrose and Fountain, or up there in East Hollywood. I don't know if anybody's been to that part of the city, but they rehearse there at this Ukrainian Russian church. And that's where I found them when I went to interview them some years ago. It was really something special to see this Russian orchestra playing these crazy looking instruments like this thing, or the bass balalaika. So I'm a big fan of these cultural community centers because they are so important in the fabric of a city. And again, they don't have their own community center. They play and rehearse at a church. So thank you, Betto, for telling the story. Would you say that this kind of music is difficult to learn for someone who isn't familiar? No, it's not. Any musician really can learn how to play. I'll tell you something that my wife says. We are all artists. Everyone can play an instrument, and anyone can learn music from anywhere. We all have a talent as human beings to be able to do something artful with our souls. So I mean, that's a bigger answer to your question, but everyone can play this music. Yeah, it's not something that you have to be culturally specific. But yeah, I haven't seen most of the kids in those bands, in those Oaxacan brass bands, are kids from those communities, from the Oaxacan community. I haven't noticed anybody that's there outside of that community. But who knows? Maybe they become big and bigger, that they start to spread around, other communities. That would be great. I think that's great. So, by the way, the Ukrainian, the Balalaika Orchestra does have musicians from the Latino community. So there's a lot of Americans of maybe Russian, ethnicity, if you will, maybe Russian Americans or Ukrainian Americans. But that night I went to see them rehearse. I asked one of the musicians I interviewed. I said, "So it looks like you have folks from the Latino community," and they go, "Of course, our music is can be played by anybody. Yeah, and there was a young, like a teenage girl, maybe 14, 15 years old, and there was also a guy in there. So there was about 2 or 3, not many, but there were Latinos playing in the balalaika orchestra. I just thought that was fantastic. Anything else? Any other comment? I'll move to the third story. The third story is about a little bit related to the pandemic and what happened in the past year, and who knows, maybe the reason we're even here together today. It's related to LA historic shop, a music shop. It's called Candela's Guitar Shop. And when I'm going to talk about this guitar shop, I'm also going to talk about a story that is a sort of connected to this story because of the strings of instruments that are manufactured by another business that has moved around LA because of this difficulty of finding a location that is inexpensive, so they could make a living making strings for instruments like all of these. In fact, I have several instruments that the strings were made by this particular entrepreneur business. But let's talk about Candela's Guitar Shop. Candela's Guitar Shop was founded by 2 brothers who came here from northern Mexico back in the 1940s, 50s. So the shop has been around that long. It's in a sense a kind of a historic institution in LA. Candela's makes instruments and has made instruments for bands like Los Lobos, musicians from all over the place. Renowned musicians have had their instruments made there. Some of them from Mexico, a couple of them from Spain, famous guitarists, and so on. So their thing is making guitars. They're luthiers. So now it is in the 3rd generation. It's owned and run by the grandson of one of the 2 brothers. And he essentially felt that he was left with this kind of institution, and he learned the trade. He learned how to make guitars, how to be a luthier, and he felt that he had a responsibility to carry on his father's and his uncle's tradition of guitar making in LA, and no matter what. So before his father, his uncle died a couple of decades ago, and so his father, his last name is Delgado. His father left him the business, and when he died some 20 years ago, and he basically told him, I want you to continue, since now you know how to make guitars. I want you to continue with the business. So you got to promise me that you're going to keep it alive. And the best thing about it is that his father and uncle, they bought a building. They bought a place where this institution, where this shop was going to remain. And it's right in the heart of East LA, on Cesar Chavez Boulevard, between it's Cesar Chavez near Mott, which is a very kind of a historic corner right there, as in back in the day, in that corner of Mott and Cesar Chavez was the place called the Paramount. Paramount was the Paramount Ballroom. And you might wonder, why is it called the Paramount Ballroom? Is it related to Paramount Pictures? Yes, it was. It was the Paramount Ballroom owned by none other than Rita Hayworth's father. Eduardo Cancino. I don't know if you're familiar with that building. Back in the day, at the turn of the 20th century, that building was the home of a famous Jewish bakery. And it was also the home of the Union of Bakers of Los Angeles. And the famous writer Upton Sinclair had an office in that building. It was also the place where major musicians came from all over the country to play there because they couldn't play in downtown, but they could play in East LA. Can you imagine seeing for the first time Stevie Wonder when he was about 16 years old? He came to play in LA because he's not from here. I don't know if you know, he was from, I think he was from Detroit or somewhere in the Midwest. He played, and his debut was there at the Paramount Ballroom. And countless other names, Sonny and Cher, I think, played at one point. Some lesser known names of music before they became famous started playing there at the Paramount Ballroom. It was the place to be. It was the place to play. And so nearby is where Candela's Guitar Shop, perfect place, right? To start your business, to continue your business. They bought this building. But last year, the owner of Candela's Guitar Shop was really worried. So I contacted him and I said, hey, what's going on? He says, I don't know, Betto. He says, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose my business. I'm afraid I'm going to be struggling because I can't afford, to have the business anymore. He says, the building is owned by the shop, by me, because of my father. But sadly, he says, the business is gone. He says, I don't have, people aren't coming to buy instruments. And so he got really worried. So let me tell you a little bit of what I wrote. This business has been seriously threatened. Delgado says the regular clientele included musicians who came to the store for strings, accessories, and repairs, but that side of his business has dried up. All of that is gone, he said. The things that are keeping me busy right now are the custom orders that I've had on backlog, and that's about it. Since the pandemic shut Candela's guitar shop doors more than 2 months ago, Delgado says he's been building more classical and flamenco guitars, and he's doing more restoration work. Tomás Delgado says that the daily income he's been losing over the past 2 months will never be recovered. My grandpa, my dad, made me promise that I would keep the hours and keep the business going, but this revenue, we're never going to get it back, he says. It's going to be a long-term effect on my small business, and I'm sure everybody else's. And when he said everybody else, I immediately think of another business owned by Jacob Hernandez. Not far, something like 2 miles from that business, also in Cesar Chavez in a side street, is another little business called Guadalupe Custom Strings. The business is owned by Jacob Hernandez. He's a Mexican-American musician, entrepreneur, and he's owned Guadalupe Custom Strings for maybe about 15 years or so. He's been manufacturing strings for all kinds of traditional instruments for more than 15 years, moving from one place to another as rent keeps going up all over East LA. I don't think I need to tell you, because you probably know about what's been happening in East LA and Boyle Heights in terms of gentrification. There's even a Netflix series about it. Gentified, is it called? Gentified, I think it's called. And that's another story. I've known of 4 places, 4 locations where Guadalupe Custom Strings has been in the last 15 years. I've been to every one of them because every time there's a musician that comes from Spain or Mexico that I'm friends with, and I give him a little tour of LA so they can see some locations. I always, if they're the guitar music, guitarists, I take him to Guadalupe Custom Strings so they can, get some strings, some handmade strings for their guitars. And they're of course amazed to see, because typically when you go visit them, they're making strings right there in front of you. Right now, they are in probably the smallest location that I've seen them since they've moved around for the last 15 years, 16 years. This is almost like, it's a room probably smaller than the room that I'm in right now, which is roughly, it's about 15 feet by 15. And they have the lathe, the place where they make, they rotate the strings to make them, and they have all their supplies on one side, and they have a table where they work some stuff, but not much more than that. I mean, luckily, it's a business that can be, in a small room, but it shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, they should be able to display, the strings and instruments. They should have more than that, but they can't, because this is a little room they rent behind a car shop in the very back. There's not even a sign that says Guadalupe Custom Strings in the back, because that's a mechanic shop. So last time I went to visit him, that's where he was. This is, before the pandemic. So no, I actually interviewed him, yes, before the pandemic, because, and I remember when I interviewed him for a story that I did about them, along with the Candela's Guitar Shop for KPCC, he sent me his replies by WhatsApp messaging. So there's another story about difficulty of surviving businesses during this particular time that we're living in. And last time I went to visit Candela's Guitar Shop on Cesar Chavez in East LA, he had a smile on his face. He was very happy. He was even, offering me to do an event for my book in the back. But, obviously because of the pandemic, we just haven't, maybe next year, done anything. But he wants to do like a, maybe do like a little concert with some musicians, and then do a book talk and sell my book and that kind of thing. But he's doing well. Business picked up, things opened up, as you know. And little by little, he started to pick up his business. Musicians started returning to buy, and he also managed to get one of these loans that the federal government was giving to businesses. He wasn't successful in the first round last year because, as you can imagine, everybody went. I don't know. You're probably familiar with those loans, right? That the government was handing out, and they were not. You didn't need to pay them if you couldn't pay them back. So he applied the first time around, and he says, forget it. I just couldn't do it in time, and the money dried up. But the second time around, I think his accountant or somebody that helps with him with his business, the money stuff, managed to get one of those loans and help them pay some bills, because he had laid off some people. So things are doing better for him. And like I said, the last time I visited Guadalupe Custom Strings, he was doing fine, because he doesn't need to have any bigger than what he is, than what he is right now, and he's continuing to make strings just like before. So anything else? Any more comments? That's sort of the last story that I planned, but I'm hoping that we can converse. Alex?
Yeah, was he able to hire back some of the people that he had to let go?
I haven't asked him yet. I do know that he kept one person employed. She's sort of the person that runs the shop and opens the shop and closes the shop, because he's always in the back working on instruments. He's not attending the front. But he's doing fine. He's, like I said, he's definitely survived the worst part of it, which was in the middle of last year when it was really dire.
Yeah, thanks for sharing these really beautiful and powerful stories. You know, another thought I have now is I think our students and other folks here would be really interested to know what life is like for you as a freelance journalist and storyteller, and speaking about talking about insecure employment and stuff like that, and what it's like being independent.
I've been doing this for, oh God, more than 20 years. I've been lucky enough that my partner, my wife, works at the music center, and she's got a great job, and has obviously has been able to help support the family all these years. We have a son that just graduated last June from Santa Clara University up in the Bay Area. He recently, about a month ago, he finally got a job full-time at Santa Clara University. We couldn't be more happy. And as far as me, it's funny, I found myself wondering what I was going to do during the pandemic, because most of my work was about music stories for NPR, for KPCC. Sadly, KPCC's management, and I can understand, of course, they canceled 2 shows where I was doing all my stories about music. One was called The Frame. That was canceled. I think the last show aired somewhere in March of last year. They said it was temporary, but I mean, I don't see it coming back. All the folks that were working on the show were either let go. There was about 6, I think, folks that were producing that show. They were let go, or they had to move to other departments, because obviously there were more important stories to be told than entertainment or music. Everybody had to focus on the pandemic and the economy, etc. So they canceled the show, and this had to happen. The next show was canceled. They said that was because the host got a job at NPR. The former host of the program is called Take Two with A. Martinez. That show was also canceled as soon as he left. He got a job as one of the hosts of Morning Edition on NPR, and the show was canceled because he was the show. So that's gone. They said that they're going to come back with a new show in January. I have no idea. But my stories were airing on those 2 programs, so I haven't done a story for KPCC since June of last year. It's been a while. So to kind of complete the answer to your question, so what I did in August of last year, I decided that I wanted to do a book, and I figured out how to do the book. I decided to compile, the stories that I've done over the years for NPR, for The World, for the BBC, and for KPCC. I obviously selected out of 300 something stories that I've done over the years. I decided to select 150 stories, and I put them together in this book. And I published this on my own through a publisher in Mexico. So the book, interestingly, the book was published in Mexico in English, and then I self-published it in the U.S. I think somebody put that. I don't know if that was you, Alex. The link on Amazon. Don't go to Amazon. I can, if anybody's interested, I can sell you the book. And I have 2 versions, one in English and one in Spanish. And not only that, it'll be cheaper and much better, because the one on Amazon is doesn't have any photos. This one has 180 something photos. See, every story has a photograph, so you can kind of see what the musicians look like, and there's obviously each photo tells a lot of stories, but all the stories have photographs of the musicians, and the book at Amazon doesn't have that. So if anyone's interested, Alex, if you don't mind, I'd love to share my email with folks, and you can, certainly let me know, and I'll sign it and dedicate it to you. Even better.
Sounds like a great Christmas present.
Funny you should say that. I'm actually doing after this afternoon, I'm doing a talk. The Fender Foundation, Fender, the music instrument company, because of an interview that aired on NPR back in March about my book, the director of education for the Fender Foundation reached out to me and said, Betto, we'd love to buy some books for Fender for our employees. So they bought 50 books from me, and then they said, can you give a talk about music to our employees? And I said, absolutely, anything. What would you like me to talk about? And she goes, Latin music. I said, fine. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been giving lectures at the State Department for the Foreign Service Institute, and so yeah, I can talk about pretty much anything Latin, no problem. Mexican music, I'm there. Music in the US that's Latin, happy to do that. So I've been doing talks for them. And this afternoon, I'm doing a talk for teachers that work at LA Unified in person at the City Club downtown. I'm doing a talk about musicians in Los Angeles and that specifically play guitars or bass. And the foundation bought 35 books to give as gifts. You said it, Alex, to give as gifts to the teachers that are going to be there this afternoon. So yeah, if you want the Spanish version, I don't know if anybody here is bilingual, but the Spanish version is cool too. It's a different cover, and it's got a discography of 300 titles if you're into music, and obviously it's a different book because it's in Spanish, but it's also available. And again, don't go to Amazon. Happy to sell it to you. So that's it for me. I wish that people would converse or comment about anything about music, because I can go on for hours.
We actually have another question in the chat from Emily that follows on some of what you were talking about your experiences during the pandemic.
I appreciate how you make it accessible for people to be interviewed. I'm especially thinking about how you let one person you interviewed to send responses to WhatsApp. With this pandemic, it can be difficult for people to meet face to face. Has it been a challenge for you to share these stories during a time like this? Yeah, that's a good question. What I did last year, since Zoom and social media became so vital for so many people, when we all sort of went into lockdown, what I did is I started a series of, for lack of a better word, shows on social media. So instead of doing stories for NPR, which I didn't do that many last year, I think I did 3 stories on NPR only because of, again, the situation. And then I think I did about 3 or 4 for the BBC. Because of that, I decided to do interviews by YouTube and Facebook. So my nephew, who's a millennial and is brilliant about social media and all of that stuff, he helped me from Mexico. He's based in Mexico. He helped me organize, do my YouTube channel, and he was always like, I don't know who is handling this technical aspect of it, Alex, but he was that person for me in Mexico. So I would, connect all the artists. And so I interviewed artists from Spain, Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, definitely Mexico. There was an interview with a Cuban pianist. And so I did this, sort of interviews on social media, so that I was active doing stuff. And then, of course, my book project became kind of like the thing to do. So I stopped pretty much doing that in September when I decided to work, full time on putting my book together, and the book came out, and thankfully it's been doing well. It's been selling. The English version has been selling more than the Spanish version, but I mean that's who knows about that market. It's a new territory to me. So thank you for asking. It's been challenging, but not. I mean, I've been busy. I've been doing stuff. So I'm happy that the pandemic brought some good things, and that one of the things is this book. So, and different ways of connecting with people. So I'm happy about that. And just like today, we're connecting, with you, and I'm happy that you appreciate what I'm doing and the stories that I'm telling. Thank you. Comments, questions? Let's see. Can you speak more on the connection between identity and music? How might music be empowering for youth growing up in Los Angeles? Okay, Emily. Let's see. Identity. Wow, that's a great question. And it's a question I can spend quite a bit of time talking about. Music and identity. I found that identity is much more than meets the eye. It's much more than I'm Mexican. It's much more than I'm, this, or I'm Mexican American. It's much more than that. It's about who you are based on everything that you grew up with and that you are today thanks to all of those influences growing up. I actually address identity in my book quite a bit. In fact, the biggest chapter is called Identity. It's the book opening. It's the opening of the book, and there are more than 20 stories about identity in this book. For example, I'll give you just one example. Armenian music in the USA is not what you think it is. One thing I learned over the years is that Armenian music was influenced very heavily by American music, both here and in Armenia, because you may not know this, Armenia was part of the Soviet Empire back in the day. It was a communist country. It was a country under the direction of the Soviets, and they imposed a communist government, in Armenia. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Berlin Wall fell down in 1989, Armenians freed themselves as well. Just like every other country in the Soviet sphere, they became free of whatever they wanted to do, and so I learned one thing from Armenian musicians living here in Los Angeles. They told me that jazz, remember we talked about jazz with the Lambert Park, that jazz was actually the way in which they could express themselves freely more than any other music. And so many musicians went to jazz as a way of expressing their freedom during the times of the Soviet, control, of the communist control back then, and so as a result, jazz is very popular in Armenia, but also here in the U.S. with Armenian musicians. I met a young pianist here in Los Angeles. And she told me about this part of the story of Armenian music, and then at the same time she told me about these medieval singers that live in the Van Nuys area, where there's a Armenian Orthodox church, and she participates in these rituals of singing these, ancient medieval songs from these musicians. And so she's influenced by Armenian ancient music and American music, jazz. So that's one way in which identity, to me, says more than I'm Armenian, says more than I'm Mexican. Everything that you see here, for example, in these instruments is what defines me. I know it's very complicated, but we are more than meets the eye. And so I hope I answered a little bit of your question, but identity to me is so much more than that, and I address it in so many different ways in this book, in the first chapter, with all these stories. Let's go to the next one.
So Melanie asked, had it always been a goal for you to write a book? And then Henry also asked, may I ask what part of your job as a music journalist was the best part in your view?
Okay. I've been wanting to write a book for about 5 years, to actually say, okay, this is me. The stories aired and they were gone, right? You listen to the radio, you listen to it now, it's gone, right? After you hear the story, it's gone. It'll stay with you if the story touched you, it will stay with you. But I felt like I wanted to have something physical. I mean, it sounds a little macabre to say this, but what the heck? I felt like, if I die tomorrow, there's a book I left. I know there's stories out there in the ether, and people can go online and put my name on Google and say Betto Arcos, their story. You can hear all these stories I did. You can hear them. But I think it's another thing is just to have a book, something physical that I feel like it's like a record, like an album, for musicians. Yeah, you recorded it, it's digital, and you put it on the cloud and it's up there and that's that. But another thing is to have a physical record. It's like, yeah, I was here. Here's my record of what I did. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to do it. And the second one is because I felt that so many of these stories are still relevant today. I mean, all of the stories that I selected, I felt like they had some relevance still today, and that many of them were not listened to by a lot of people. And I felt like they also read well as stories because they're so short. I mean, all these stories you can read in 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. You can just pick up the book anywhere. There's no order per se. There are 12 chapters, but you can't really, you don't really have to start from the beginning. You can go in the back and read about music in Argentina, or music in Los Angeles, or music in Spain, or Tunisia, for example. So I felt like I wanted to share that power of music in a different way, and that's why I did it. But thank you for asking. The next one is what, by Henry, is it? Thank you for telling the stories. May I ask, what part of your job as music journalist was the best part in your view, and what gives you hope for the future and inclusion for all ethnicities to continue this legacy of music in our communities? That's a great question. The best part of me as a journalist is really telling a story that someone is compelled to do something about it, to touches them in such a way, even if it's just, oh, I just heard that story about this singer, I want to get that record, or I want to listen to that music. See, even if that is the only thing that person does, I've done my job. See, so the satisfaction of knowing that people listen to a story is the best thing that I can get as a journalist, is that people listen to it, people read it. Thank you. This is good. But when something transcendent actually happens, I can't begin to tell you how I feel. I've cried sometimes when something really moving happened because of a story. let me tell you just quickly one thing that happened. There was a Vietnamese. There's a Vietnamese musician based in the Bay Area in San Jose, and I did a review of her music on an NPR program on the weekend called All Things Considered. It was a group of 4 or 5 artists that I included in that. It was all about the music of California or something like that. And so the host interviewed me and I talked about each musician. So that aired on, All Things Considered. It was listened to by you guess 5, 6, 7 million people in 50 states across the USA, and not to mention in Europe, etc. So millions listen to this story. The next week, I get an email from the musician herself who said, Betto, I can't thank you enough. Because of your review of my music, I got a gig in a performing arts center in the Midwest. And I can't thank you enough. And that to me is significant, that someone listened to the story of this Vietnamese immigrant whose music is all about music on the other side of the planet, and someone listened to it that wanted to program something special or different in their performing arts center in the Midwest. I mean, what can I say? That's very, very touching to me. And when an artist, for example, I did a story just a couple of weeks ago about a singer-songwriter from Colombia, from the coffee region of Colombia. She did an album of children's music during the pandemic last year. She put it out, let's see what happens. I love the album. I listened to it and I reviewed it for a Spanish language online magazine. And I said, what a great album, what a great thing. It feels like this very sacred space where people of all ages, not just kids, can listen to it and just find themselves enchanted in this is what we need right now during the pandemic. We needed something to bring us home, to take us home, to make us feel nurtured, taken care of, just like you did with your children. That's what I told her. I did a story about her for NPR finally, because her album was nominated for a Latin Grammy, and I said, that's it. That's the excuse I needed so I can pitch it to my editor, and my editor, I'd be surprised if he said no. Sure enough, my editor said yes. I did a story. I interviewed her. The story aired, and she has now way more listeners now on Spotify. Her record was on the top of Amazon children's music. On iTunes, it was at the very top of children's music. That to me says something. Before that, nobody knew who she was. So there is my satisfaction right there. I'm just I feel like I've done my job when something like that happens. So we have time for more questions.
Absolutely. No, I think that's, I think on that note, it's time to please join me in a virtual celebration and expression of gratitude to Betto Arcos for such a wonderful presentation. This was so cool, really powerful and moving, and we were really lucky to have you. So thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mike Wu, for the invitation. And I'm thrilled, and I'm happy to talk about the things that I care about anytime. So thank you so much.